Chapter 5. Nobody Announced It. Tom Bradshaw's father retired in 1987 with a pension. Tom remembers the retirement party, held on a Friday afternoon in the break room of the machine shop where his father had worked for 31 years. Sheet cake, a card signed by everyone, a watch. His father was 58 years old. He walked out of that building and never worked again, and as far as Tom could observe, the financial transition was essentially seamless. A check arrived each month. The amount was fixed. His parents made no dramatic adjustments to their lifestyle. Tom did not think much about how this worked. He was 22 at the time. The pension was simply a fact of his father's life, the way a salary was a fact of his own, something that arrived reliably as a consequence of having worked. Tom retired last year at 64 after 35 years in logistics management. He had $1.1 million in a 401k, $90,000 in a brokerage account, and Social Security. He had no pension. The company he started with in 1988 had a pension plan. It was frozen in 1997 before he had vested enough to receive anything meaningful and converted to a 401k match. Nobody made a particular announcement about what this meant for his retirement. It was a benefits change, communicated in a memo, understood at the time as a neutral administrative event. Tom understood it that way too. He was 33. Retirement was far away. The shift from defined benefit to defined contribution retirement, from the pension to the 401k, is one of the most significant changes in American economic life over the past half-century. It is also one of the least discussed, not because it is secret, but because it happened gradually, without ceremony, in the form of thousands of individual benefits, memos sent to millions of individual workers over several decades. No politician ran on eliminating the pension. No law made it illegal. No single event marked the transition. It simply occurred, driven by corporate cost pressures, regulatory changes, and the genuine appeal of portability and individual control that the 401k offered, until one day the pension was a rarity, a vestige of certain industries and public employment, and the 401k had become the default assumption of American retirement. The workers who experienced this transition did not, for the most part, experience it as a loss. They experienced it as a change in account type. The pension was replaced by something that also accumulated money for retirement, that also had a balance, that also arrived on a statement. The comparison seemed, in the moment, roughly equivalent. It was not equivalent. But the non-equivalence took decades to become visible, and it became visible not in any single announcement, but in the aggregate experience of an entire generation trying to do something their parents' generation had not needed to figure out for themselves. What the pension provided, and what Tom's father never had to think about, was the conversion problem. The pension converted working years into retirement income automatically on a formula without requiring the worker to make any decisions about how to manage the transition. The worker contributed, or the employer contributed on their behalf, and at the end of the career, a monthly check arrived. The conversion had been handled by someone else, using actuarial expertise and risk pooling that individual workers could not replicate on their own. The 401k does not handle the conversion. It accumulates assets and stops. What happens next, how those assets become income, in what sequence, at what tax cost, in response to what conditions, is the worker's problem. The 401k was designed to give workers control over their retirement assets. What it actually gave them in most cases was a pile of assets and a very difficult problem they were not equipped to solve. Tom's father did not know how to manage a retirement portfolio because he never needed to. Tom has been managing a retirement portfolio for 35 years and still is not sure he knows how to convert it into reliable income. These are related but distinct skills, and the transition between them, from accumulation to distribution, is the place where the entire architecture of the shift becomes most consequential. Tom does not blame anyone for this. He does not think of it as a betrayal. It is simply what happened, a structural change that transferred an enormous amount of complexity and risk from institutions to individuals without transferring the expertise required to manage that complexity and risk. Nobody announced that part. There is a loneliness to this that is difficult to name. Tom's father had a community of people who retired the same way he did, on the same terms, with the same expectations. The retirement was legible to everyone around it, to the union, to the employer, to Tom's mother, to the neighbors who had all worked similar jobs and received similar pensions. The rules were shared. The outcomes were predictable. The retirement existed within a social context that understood it. Tom's retirement is, in a fundamental sense, his alone. The $1.1 million in his 401k is not legible to anyone but him and his advisor. The decisions about how to draw it down, in what sequence, at what rate, with what tax implications, these are decisions that Tom must make or must pay someone to help him make in a context where there is no shared framework, no union pension officer, no institutional knowledge that has been accumulated over decades for exactly this purpose. His neighbors are navigating the same thing, each of them separately, each with their own advisor and their own spreadsheet, and their own set of assumptions that may or may not be accurate. They do not compare notes. The topic is too personal, too variable, too tangled up with income and savings rates and decisions made decades ago that it feels strange to discuss. This is a new kind of retirement experience. Not worse in every way, there are genuine freedoms in the 401k system that the pension did not provide, but different in a way that the generation living it was not prepared for because the preparation assumed a different system. Tom thinks about his father sometimes when he checks his account balance. His father never checked anything. The check arrived. You could count on the check. Tom cannot count on the balance in the same way. The balance is real, and it will, in all likelihood, support him for the rest of his life. But the balance requires management, and management requires decisions, and decisions made in the wrong sequence or at the wrong time or in the wrong tax context will produce outcomes that the balance itself does not reveal in advance. His father's retirement had a floor built in. Tom's retirement requires him to build his own floor from assets that do not automatically become income, using tools he was given without instruction. 40 years ago, when Tom's father walked out of the machine shop to the sound of applause and accepted the watch and ate the sheet cake, roughly 40% of private sector workers had a defined benefit pension. Today, fewer than 15% do. Nobody announced the change. It accumulated, the way most structural changes do, in the background, in the fine print, in the benefits memos that workers filed away or discarded, in the gradual redefinition of what retirement meant and who was responsible for making it work. Tom's father never learned to manage a retirement portfolio. He never needed to. Tom has spent 35 years learning, and he is still not certain he has learned the right things. 3 months after he stopped working, Tom was reviewing his monthly expenses against his withdrawal plan. The numbers were reasonable, the trajectory was manageable, and then he noticed something. He was doing this calculation himself, alone, at a kitchen table, with a spreadsheet he had built from scratch, without any institutional support or shared framework or community of people who had navigated exactly this before. His father had never done this calculation. His father had never needed to. Tom sat with that for a moment, not with bitterness. He understood why the system had changed, understood that the change had not been malicious, understood that the 401k had given him things the pension would not have. But underneath the understanding was something harder to name. The pension did not just provide income, it provided a kind of institutional witness, the sense that somewhere, something larger than one person was tracking the obligation and ensuring it would be met. The 401k provides assets, the witness is gone. Tom manages his own retirement now. He does it carefully, thoughtfully, with the same competence he brought to 35 years of logistics work. He does it entirely alone.